One day we were going out in the car and just about to drive off, and he just said to me, "Oh Mum, I'm glad I've got dyslexia because now I know I'm not stupid." And that was the whole crux of it. He just thought there was something wrong with him, that he was a dummy. And I think it was good for him because it gave him a reason as well.
Ryan is just one of the 7% of school children in New Zealand who are dyslexic.
And in the school reports, it was coming out that his reading was falling behind and his writing was really messy and his spelling was terrible. When he was down and sad, he'd be in his room for 3 hours crying, and we'd be in there trying to console him and stuff. Sort of got this emotional wreck in front of you, and poor Megan would be standing in the doorway just probably thinking, what the heck's going on here, you know, what's wrong with him? And it kind of went on for a couple of months, and we sort of started to get quite worried about it because he'd just cry for hours on end. He was sad, and that he'd felt sad since he was 5, and that he wasn't enjoying life. Just, yeah, really upsetting.
He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be at school. We were sort of at a loss for what was going on.
He basically asked for help. So we asked our doctor. She suggested Marionotto, the Children's Mental Health Unit, and they got it out of him that it was all revolved around school. I was over at my girlfriend's house one day and I was talking to her about it, and she said to me, "It sounds like he's dyslexic." I contacted SPELD and told them, you know, what our situation was, and they said, well, because of the pilot program they had extra funding, so Ryan's assessment was free, which was a massive saving.
Sharon Purchase is managing the pilot program for SPELD.
The SPELD pilot program was set up to gather more evidence about what happens when you get early intervention to these children at age 7, when they're first starting to really show signs of not coping in the classroom. We've pulled in 42 children throughout New Zealand, and we've been teaching them twice a week all year, from the poorest 1 decile schools to the decile 10 schools. So at this stage in New Zealand we are mainly only able to help children from families who can afford to pay. We constantly fundraise, apply to charities for grants, and when we can get them then we have hardship grants, and we will go out and reach out to a child from a very low income family.
I'm Judith Alexander and I'm a SPELD assessor. The assessment is an important part of any remedial type program, particularly the SPELD program. We look at things like their spelling, rapid picture naming, looking at what their knowledge is, looking at literacy, also looking at their thinking, how they process information. If we write a report, the SPELD tutor can look at how they might change or alter their program to meet the needs of the child. There's a lot of people that think themselves failures in terms of school, but it's actually because they haven't necessarily had the right tuition, or they haven't had the right help so that they can actually learn the way that they learn best.
He came back that his dyslexia was only mild. It wasn't really as bad as a lot of other kids. It was still enough to just bring him down.
I'm Catherine Bird, I'm a SPELD teacher. I work with SPELD New Zealand and got invited to work on the pilot program with Ryan. When I first started to hear about Ryan, I was a little bit concerned. I thought, well, I've got quite a difficult child here. He had anxiety problems related to coming to school. He was disruptive and being sat with his face to the wall and his back to the class, and he was throwing pencils around and shouting, and quite bad behaviour from last year.
I was getting yelled at heaps. Annoying and real bad.
But you were being a bit naughty in class too, weren't you?
Yeah, at the start I wasn't.
He knows he's clever, but he doesn't understand why he isn't producing the work that other children are producing. With Ryan, because we were working with the pilot program, it was 2 3/4-hour lessons in a week. His biggest need was his reading, his spelling, comprehension, but also the outcome of what the problem is, I guess you could say. For me, the thing that I'm most interested in is how his brain is working. Last year I
Grew.
Okay.
G-R-E-W.
Well done. There's actually quite a few in this group. Flew, flew in a plane, F-L-E-W. First lesson that I do with a child, I do an eye tracking test. When I brought the pen in to his nose, well, one eye came in and the other eye went this way, and I said, you are concentrating on that pen, aren't you? You are concentrating, aren't you? And he goes, yes, you have got both eyes. Yes, I have, but one eye was off and the other eye was in, and of course the dominant eye was sending the message to the brain. So I got Hayley in actually and said, you stand behind me and you watch. So we did the eye tracking, and I said, you need to see a behavioural optometrist.
When it comes to diagnosing these areas, generally when parents come in to see us, they are certainly relieved that they can find some explanation as to why their child is not progressing as they would expect. Most of the kids that we see are bright and intelligent, but the parents are frustrated because they're not making the progress. That's the goal of therapy, is to provide sufficient visual skills, whether it's eye tracking, the mechanics of the eyes, or whether it's how well we process the information. And this is essentially attention training. What I want you to do, thanks, is call out the numbers starting at the top here and going all the way down to the bottom. We really see what we're doing as being complementary. If we don't diagnose and treat these problems, for some kids it is going to be profoundly difficult for them to progress and move forward at school. Sometimes we see students that are functioning okay at school, but the parents are very aware of the fact that their kids are not performing as well as they could do, but no one's been able to identify what the problem is. What every school needs, in fact, is some kind of auditing process where they can go through and look at the visual and auditory development of the child to see whether there aren't any underlying physiological type problems which are affecting the rate of learning.
Ryan's behavioural exercises given to him from the optometrist, and it's all to do with their spatial awareness. So I touch Ryan in a spot,
And I hit the board.
and then he has to touch the same spot on the board. That's the one. I think they give you certain exercises one after the other to all help that reading, that flow of moving your eyes across the page.
When I sort of look at the word and I try and look at it, but it goes all blurry. Now that doesn't happen anymore.
Unless you actually ask the child, do the letters stay still, they don't think to say anything. You know, it's like children with just poor vision. They think everyone looks at a blurry world. So usually they're a bit older before the parents realise they have a sight problem. Let's carry on with our lesson. You can have that space, I'll have this space. Working memory is the underlying problem that a lot of these children have. I would spend half that time working on memory, because if they can't remember and if they can't retrieve, then they're not going to achieve at school. This is quite hard. It's much harder than doing short vowels like cat and hat and bed and pin and what have you, because they have to have visual memory for this one plus auditory memory. What I do is I give him a word and then he stands on the vowel pattern that fits that word. If I said scream, good. Okay, so can you spell scream for me?
Yes. C-R. E-A-M.
Well done. The psychologist said his writing was flowing better, he had better letter shape. And that's all his work. All I've done is facilitated the idea for him.